Hello guys, I hope you are doing good. Welcome to another video. Today we are going to take an interview test which was provided from Hive. Few days back someone has contacted me on LinkedIn and he has shared this document and asked me like what would be the difficulty of this if I'm appearing for a ST2 level. So I explained him the level of this difficulty. It will be around 8 of 10 if you are getting this type of questions in your ST2 interview. But ST2 bracket ranges from 3 to 6 years of experience. If you are at around 6 years of experience, then it will be a little bit easier for you to solve this. If you are around 3 years of experience, then it will be a little harder for you to solve this. So I thought that why not I solve this or why not I take this test myself and see if I can solve it. So here I am creating a video around this. So let's go through the problem statement to understand it clearly and then we'll try to solve it. As it is mentioned, the time limit is 30 minutes, so we have to solve this within 30 minutes. Let's read the problem statement. It says that the goal is to create a promise scheduler to create a JavaScript class that accepts an array of functions. The functions can be async functions, so it can be a mixture of sync and async functions. The class exposes methods to execute the array of functions in serial or in sequence one by one, as well as pause the execution in between. The methods and the constructor signature of the class can be derived from the following examples. So here we see the array of promises, async functions which return promises. First one is basically a delay function. So it returns a new promise that resolves after specified amount of time. Second is same async function which uses the delay function above one. Then third is it returns a new promise which loads image, and according to how the image loads, if it is successfully loaded, it is resolved, and if it is not successfully loaded, it will reject. So these are some of the examples of the async functions. You can create as many as you want, but if you notice, each one of these are returning a promise. So async functions always returns a promise. Synchronous function here, it is manually returning the promises. Now this is how the promise scheduler constructor look like. So when we create the promise scheduler, we have to pass the array of async functions which return promises and options. In the options, we have start index from where the execution should start, and then callbacks. Callbacks is on completed. When all of the array are completed, then we have to return the result of those. Now the constructor or the promise scheduler returns 4 methods. Run, that will start the execution. Async pause, it will halt the execution. GetState, it returns the current state of the scheduler. And then run all executed functions. So let's say if we have started from the index 3 and if we have completed all the indexes forward that, when we run on unexecuted functions, it should start from 0 to the start index, which is 3. Please note, once pause is executed, next execution of run should begin from where the scheduler is left off. And yeah, this is the example which explains how it should work. Because it is a promise, let's say if you have invoked the promise as index 2, so it will complete. You cannot halt the promise or the ongoing execution of the promise, but post that we will not do anything once the pause is triggered. So an ongoing promise should complete, but thereafter it should not trigger. And this is the examples that they have shared. They have created a delay function, assuming that they have created a delay. Then we have started to run. We did a delay of 6 seconds, and then we have paused the running, and then we get the state. So the state returns either it is in progress, paused, or completed, where each denotes what's the state, and then unexecuted functions indices. So the state should also return the unexecuted functions indices, and this is how the execution should look like. So these are examples. Now based on this, let's start and implement this. So I have added that question already on the my course. Uh, if you want, you can enroll into the course and start practicing. You get lifetime access after the first enrollment. So let's start creating this. Here I have the web dev environment because I wanted to run the code and check if it is executing properly or not live. That's why I'm using the web dev environment, but you can use, I mean, if you want, we can also do it in the Node.js environment. So let me copy the example. I have already created the async functions and the array of promises. So one is the delay function, one is image load. Then we have random functions which uses the delay for specified time. And then also have a synchronous function in the array of promises. So let me use this example. They had added only on completed in the callbacks. I have also included on pause and on start so that we get a good understanding if how the code is running. And then these are the options. So in the options we are passing start index and then the callbacks as specified in the test. So let me copy this. Let's copy this and paste it over here. And then after this we have this promise scheduler. We have to create this promise scheduler class which will accept the promises and the start index and callbacks. And then finally here are the test cases. So we'll come back to the test cases later. I have my signature ready, and then let's start implementing the promise scheduler. So I'll go to the top, or we can create here as well, doesn't matter. Let's create the promise scheduler. Now if you read the problem statement carefully, we have to execute the promises in sequence one by one. So I already have a video around how you can execute the promises in sequence. There are two ways. One is using the modern async await syntax with the for of loop, and second is through recursion. Here in this example, I'm going to use recursion because with recursion, I can pause the execution using a flag. So this will provide me a better control in halting the execution. We'll see how it is done. So that's why I'm going to use the recursive approach of executing the promises in sequence. So let's create the constructor over here. The constructor will accept a promise and the options as input. And then here I'm going to create promises and I'll get the promise over here. If you want, if you don't want to create a reference, you can create a clone of this. It's up to us. Then the start index. So I'm going to get the options dot start index if it is present, otherwise we'll start with 0. And similarly I'm going to take the callbacks. So options dot callbacks if it is present, otherwise we are going to take an empty object. And finally I'm going to use a flag is processing. So based on this flag we are going to determine if the execution should halt, it should continue, and this will help us in maintaining or operating the sequence, operating the promises in sequence. So we can use this. Now let's create the helper function to execute the promises in sequence. So here I'm going to create the process helper, and restart process helper. Sorry, because this is a class, we don't have to use this keyword. I can use the process helper over here. Now the process helper will be a async function. It can be a sync function as well, but because we are dealing with the asynchronous operation, so I'm keeping it as a async function. The first thing I'm going to do is add a base condition. So base condition, and if this is processing, so if it is not processing or the flag is not updated to start the processing, will halt or will terminate the process. So easy, we just added a base condition, and based on that we'll terminate the execution. Now when we are running the promises, we'll set this as true, so the promise will continue executing. Let's say if we have to pause, in the pause method we'll set it as false, and this will halt the execution. And now here I'm going to use the try catch and the finally block. You can use the thenable promise as well by adding dot then dot catch dot finally, but because I've created async function, I can use the await keyword over here, and then I can use the try catch block. This is more readable, so that's why I prefer using this. And now let's get the first promise. So const promise equals to, or we have to start from the index, right? So let's use the index. Let me implement with the starting execution from the first promise, and then we'll come back to the start index and we'll see how we can update this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say this dot promises dot pop. So this will give me the last promise that was added to the array, which is from the beginning. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to await promise, so it will do the execution. If there is an error, I'm just add console.error, error executing promise, and then finally what we'll do is we'll check if this dot promises dot length, which means if there are more items, is greater than 0, then what we are going to do is we are going to recursively call this same function. So this dot process helper. So this will execute the promises in sequence, one after the another. It will take one promise every time, execute it, and finally it will call the same function if there are more promises in the array. And now let's add a run function over here. So run, and in the run what we'll do is we'll set this dot is processing equals to true, and this dot process helper. So we said that it is processing, and we'll call the process helper, then that will recursively call itself to execute the promises. And also we'll invoke the callbacks. So because we have the callback for on start, so we'll invoke that. So this dot callbacks dot on start. So this will check if the on start is there in the callbacks, then it will execute it. So now we got our promise scheduler, we got the array of promises, and let's start executing it and see if the execution is happening or not. So let me add a console log over here just to make sure that the execution is happening, and let's do execution. So it should be called, the execution log should be printed the number of times or the length of the array. So how many elements or how many promises we have in the array. Now, so our promise scheduler is there, and here I'm going to do run the promise scheduler, and let's click on the run and let's see what's the output. So execution started and it is in progress. This has executed only once. Let's see what is happening. Right. Then it has done the execution 3 times, and finally we got an error. The error is thrown from the image load because it was not able to load it. So on the error it has rejected, and then we got the final execution. So execution has started, and then we have the execution over here, and it has run. Let's clear this, let's reload and see the output again. So we are getting this first execution, not sure why. There is one, then the remaining should also appear. The delay is because we have added the delays of 8 seconds and 6 seconds. That's why you are seeing the output in delays. So execution and execution. This first execution will have to check why it is coming. Let's add a comment and see if it is executing. So yeah, it has appeared again. Let me check what has happened. So async process helper. Okay. So the callback should start here, and then we should do the process helper. So callback will be invoked first, and then the process helper. And then we got execution at the start. How many promises do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5. Yeah. So as we have 5 promises in the array, that's why we are getting 5 execution logs, which is correct. So this is working fine. Now let's update this to start from the index. Our execution should start from the execution index rather than picking one, and then based on whether we have more promises or unexecuted promises, it should call the onCompleted method. So let's do that change. For that, what I'll do is I'll create a map. So this dot promises pending. I'll create a map over here, and what I'll do is I'll get object dot keys from the promises, basically all the index of the array, and I'm going to create a map around it. Let me stop this. So here what I'll do is I'll say a of b equals to false. So what I'm doing is I'm creating a map, and from the beginning I'm setting that this promise has not been executed. So promise at the index is not executed. This is set as false, and then I'll return a from here, and here the empty object. So basically I'm using the reduce method to create a map of the array indexes and to track if the current promise is executed or not. So track pending promises. This will help me to track if the current promise is pending or executed or not. This is because we can use or we can start from any index. So this will help me to track how many indexes are still pending, because as per the problem statement, we have to return unexecuted function indices in the state. So this will help me to track that. Now coming back here, what I'll do is I'll get the promise. So what I'll do is I'll say this dot promise pending, and this dot start index is equals to true, which will mark that the current promise is being executed, and the promise that we are going to get is the same. So this dot promises will get the promise at the start index, and after that we'll update the start index or increment its value. because this is a sequential execution, so we are going to linearly increment this. From start index, we'll just add one more to it. Now, rather than doing this explicitly, I can do this over here as well, because this is a post increment operator. So it will return the current value and then increment it. And now we are going to execute the promises in the sequence. And here we are going to check if there are pending promises, then we don't have to call the onComplete method. But if we have reached to the last, which is if we have reached to the execution of the last index, then we should halt. So this should recursively call itself only if there are more unexecuted promises in the array. So what we'll do over here is we'll create a helper function. So first check I'm going to add is if this dot start index is less than this dot promises dot length, then recursively call the function, which means the start index, it is because it is executing linearly in the sequence. So if we haven't reached to the end of the promises, it should recursively call itself. Otherwise, what we'll do is we have to update that if processing is done, then update the flag that this dot if processing is equals to false. And now, so this has terminated the processing once we have reached to the end of the array. But this doesn't mean that all the promises in the indices, all the promises in the array are executed, because we could have started from the middle and there must be some promises pending from the beginning. So what we'll do is we have to check if all the promises has been executed or not. So what I'm going to do for that is I'm going to create a helper function which will provide me the details if all the promises are executed or not. So here let's create that. So unexecuted functions indices, and what this will do is this will return me object.keys this dot promises pending dot filter, and from here I'll check how many promises are not executed. So this is dot promises pending, and then to that I'll pass e and check which are false. So this will filter out all the indices which are not executed yet, and I'll get the list. And here I'm going to add a check if this dot unexecuted functions indices dot length equals to 0, which means there are no more pending promises. So what we'll do is this dot callbacks dot on completed, and we'll invoke it. So if there are no more pending indices, then we'll call the on completed. And let's say if there are pending indices, then what we'll do is we'll halt the processing once we have reached to the end of the array, because to execute the pending promises we have to start from the beginning, and that's why this will halt, and this will add an additional check which will make sure that if all the promises are pending, then we are calling the onComplete method. And now we got the unexecuted function indices, we got the run method. Let's add a pause method over here. So what this will do is this dot is processing equals to false, this dot callbacks dot on pause, it will invoke the on pause method, and then add the state. So get state, this will return us the state. So the first thing we are going to do is we get the executed promises indices, and we are going to get the list of that. This will return us the list of or the array of unexecuted promises, and then let's get the state. So I'm going to use a self-invoke function over here just to encapsulate the logic. And in here, I'll check if unexecuted promises indices dot length is greater than 0, which means not all the promises are completed, and else if all the promises are completed, then we'll return completed. In case if all the promises are not executed, then there are two states. If this dot is processing, then which means we are in progress, otherwise we are paused in the pause state. And then finally we have to return the state as well as unexecuted promises indices from the state method. So this gets our basic structure ready, and then one final piece is we have to run, at the end we have to run all the unexecuted functions. So if you see over here, we have to add the fourth method, run all unexecuted functions. So let's add that too, and then we'll run it to see if our code is working properly or not. So run all unexecuted functions. Now, because the promises are executing in sequence, which means even if we are starting from in between or at any index, it will move forward to the last index of the array. And when you have to execute the pending or the remaining promises, you start from the beginning. So what we'll do is we'll check if these, so basically and check like if there are unexecuted index. So if this dot unexecuted index dot length is equals to 0, which means if there is nothing, then we'll return or we'll do nothing. Otherwise what we'll do is this dot start index, will set it as 0. So basically we reset this and then we run this again. So it will start the execution from the beginning. And now we have to handle another edge case over here in the process helper. So this is the base condition which stops the execution. But let's say if we are starting from the beginning and from the middle there are some promises which are already executed. So the moment we reach to that process promise, we have to halt the execution again because we cannot go further. So I'm going to add another condition over here which will make sure that if this dot promises pending and this dot start index is equals to true, basically, which means that the promise at the current index is executed, then what we are going to do is we are going to reset and halt the processing. So we'll just set that this dot is processing equals to false. This dot callbacks dot on completed will invoke that and then will terminate from here. This is based on the hypothesis that because there is a linear execution of the promises in sequence one by one, which means if the current promise is executed, that means all the promises forward this will be executed. So we execute the promise, we halt the processing, and then we call the complete method. Now, one edge case over here is, let's say if I'm starting from the index 3, my execution has reached till index 4, and then I have clicked on the pause, which means 1 and 2 are pending, 5 and 6 are pending, 3 and 4 are executed. So what if I click on the run all unexecuted functions, this will reset and start the execution. So another check we do is, if this dot start index is not equals to this dot promises dot length, which means if we have not reached to the end, then what we do is we just run. Otherwise, we reset the index and run again. So this is the check that makes sure that if we have been paused in between and this run all unexecuted function is triggered, then it will check. If we haven't reached to the end, then it will run. Otherwise, if we have reached to the end, then it will reset and start from the beginning. Now, one more edge case to handle is, let's say if we have paused at index 3, we are going to 4 and 5. After 5, if there are unexecuted index function indices, then we have to start from the beginning to continue it. So here we'll check if there are unexecuted indices, then this dot run all unexecuted functions. So this will go to the end and then start from the beginning to run all the unexecuted functions. So this is how we can handle it. If promise is done, this dot is processing equals to false. So if we have not reached to the end, so this will only invokes when we have reached to the end. That means it does not make sense. If we have reached to the end and if we are run all the invoking, then that's the edge case we have to handle. So let's see if this is working fine or not, then we'll come back to that. So the code is added. Now let's add this test case over here, promises.run, and with the set timeout, so we'll match if it is we'll see if it matches with the output or not. So let me clear this will be closed. Let me run this again and then toggle the browser console. So see, it has started the execution, and after that we got the error execute in promises. Then we got the state. So in the first timeout we got the state. So before pausing, it has written that it is in progress and the pending promises are 0 and 4. And then after, once we have clicked on pause, so the paused callback is invoked. That's why we are seeing the console paused. And after that, if we are getting the state, so it says that it is in pause state and there are two unexecuted promises, 0 and 4. Then in the other timeout, we get the get state first. We do the get state first, so we get the pause state and the two pending indices, 0 and 4. After that, we click on run, so it starts the execution again. We see the callback console log, and if we get the state, it says that is in progress and there is one, so one promise is pending. And then again in the third timeout, when we get the state, it says that the execution is paused because we have reached to the end, and this is the first promise which is pending, as we have started from the first index. If you can see, the start index is 1, so that's why it is in pause state. and then I've run all unexecuted functions. So it has started on the unexecuted function. We see the console log that it has started again. And finally, when we get the state, it says completed, and we get the on callback completed. So 95% our logic is working properly. We can pause and resume and then unexecute. We can execute all the unexecuted functions. The only edge case is, let's say if you have paused in between. So let's say if you have array of 6 promises, you are starting from 2, you have run till 3, you have paused, then you have 4, 5 and 0, 1. Now uh, when you invoke the method to run all the unexecuted functions, so it will first check if there are indices. If we have not reached to the end, then it will start the execution that we reached to the end. But this run function and this condition will terminate once we have reached to the end, and it will be in pause state. Ideally, once it has reached to the end, it should start from the beginning again and execute the 1 and 2 as well. So we can modify a little bit. What we can do is we can remove the executed promises, or once we have reached to the end, we can have another state executing. So we can have another state which can help us to process based on the flag that if we are running all the unexecuted promises, then we have to recheck every time. Like if the unexecuted function indexes are there, then start from the beginning for that. So I think that should work, but for now let's keep it as it is, because it is running for the 95% of the use case. The final piece, I leave it up to you so that you can implement that and test. If you cannot implement that, then you can check the solution on my course to how to implement this. I hope you have enjoyed this video. If you if you have learned something new, and if you like these types of video, please subscribe to my channel. Thank you for your time.